Hi, welcome back to part 2 of my look at the Ultimark ArcadeVGA2 graphic card. In part 1 I showed you the universal driver CD that accompanies Ultimark products. I've got that up on the screen now. I've installed the ArcadeVGA graphic card in my computer. I've connected it to my Wells Gardner D9800 arcade monitor via the VGA cable, and I've put in that CD and been presented with the menu that you see in front of you. When you first have the card installed, there's a couple of things that you want to do to make sure that you have an optimum connection, particularly if you're connected to an arcade monitor. And I'll show you exactly what those utilities and drivers are that you want to install. The very first thing you want to install are the set of drivers for the graphic card. And obviously these drivers are going to communicate with the card between the operating system and the card and tell the card what it is capable of doing within the confines of the operating system. Now, I've got the PCI Express version and I'm running Windows XP Professional on my cab. So I'm going to select the AVGA PCI Express XP drivers. Of course, I've already installed those on my cab. The second thing you'll want to install is the ATI control panel. Now, where that's important is if you want to make adjustments to 3D settings. Now remember, at its core, this is a 3D capable card, and you'll be able to change things like anti-aliasing and other 3D type settings from within the ATI control panel. Once you have those two things installed, what the driver installation in particular will present you is in the bottom right hand corner you're going to see the familiar Galaga B. Okay? If you left click on the Galaga B, you'll be presented with a bunch of resolutions that you'll be capable of running on your particular monitor. Okay, and ultimately these are the resolutions that you're going to be making use of within an application like MAME. If for some reason you aren't seeing the lower resolutions here, something may have gone wrong with your driver installation. I would urge you to ensure that you have your computer completely clear of drivers, and there's some great third-party utilities. For example, this is an ATI card. If you've had an NVIDIA card in your arcade cabinet, you'll want to make sure that you use something like Clean Sweeper and completely rid the arcade cabinet of those NVIDIA drivers. Likewise, even if you had an ATI card in there, you'll want to make sure that that's completely clear, and then try to reinstall the driver set again, and you should see exactly what I'm showing you here. Okay, they might vary slightly depending on what type of monitor you have, etc. But essentially, these are the resolutions that the ArcadeVGA2 is capable of, and you can see there's quite a bunch of them. Okay. The other thing you'll want to do, in particular if you have a tri-sync monitor like I do with the D9800, is you'll want to install an excellent utility from the Ultimark website called TriSync. And what this will do is allow you to run your desktop in non-interlaced 640 by 480 or 800 by 600. Which are the SVGA modes that a lot of TriSync monitors are capable of running. Without that utility, you're going to get a flickery mess at 640 by 480 and 800 by 600. In fact, through the camera here, it's going to look flickery, but take my word for it, in person, it's crystal clear. It's flicker-free, and it's fantastic as a foundation to launch MAME, etc. from. And of course, PC games, which are going to be running at those higher resolutions. Again, flicker-free. So that's another utility that you'll want to run. And again, that's on the information section of the Ultimark website. Okay, what I want to do now is take a look at some of the settings within MAME. Now, what I highly recommend is there's a utility by a fella named Gavin Benson, and he's written a utility called AvRes. And what this will do is take away a lot of the hard work, a lot of the grunt work really, on getting the resolution set within MAME. Because really what your options are going through each of the games manually or making default universal changes, which obviously isn't going to work practically because each game has their own kind of unique resolution that it's got to run at. So the AvRes utility is highly recommended. And what it'll do, and we'll just take a look at the install folder. So if you look at the MAME UIFX installation folder and we look at the root directory, you'll see the utility sitting in there, avres, ArcadeVGA2.res.exe. What this will do is create, if you don't have one already, a MAME.xml file. And you can see that file here. For me, it's about 35 megabytes in size. That file contains all the information for the individual games. Launching avres will give you a menu option, and you'll see a couple of different things here. The first thing you want to do is put in the path to your particular iteration of MAME. Okay, so I've got mine on the C drive, MAMEUIFX132. You're just doing the typical browse button that captures the executable, and then you're presented with some options. Now, the accompanying README file details all of these options in pretty good detail. I'm just going to go over some of them really quickly. Use artwork as if you're interested in retaining the artwork. For me, I find it shrinks the game screen down. I don't like it. It does add for some games like Asteroids, but for the most part, I leave this unchecked. Single screen, I recommend a check mark here. There are a lot of multi-screen games that with this check mark will allow you to play them on a single screen. 60 Hertz only, well, as you know, a lot of the games differed and weren't necessarily just 60 Hertz. Some games run at 55, 56, 59, for example. So I recommend leaving that unchecked. The algorithm section here, what happens is if I've got mine set to proportional, so it'll first look for the closest XY resolution. Failing that, it'll find a proportional setting. If you set it just to closest XY and it doesn't find one, it won't fall back on the proportional. So I highly recommend that you have that selected. Monitor orientation, well, my D9800 is a horizontal monitor, so I've got it set to horizontal. You may have a vertical monitor and you'll want that checked. The other thing that you'll want to look at is hardware stretching, which is normally not something you'd want to do, in particular with MAME games, but with vertical resolution games on a horizontal monitor, you're not always going to find the ideal resolution. In fact, you're not going to be able to run most native vertical resolutions on a horizontal monitor. So what this does is, again, it'll approximate and find the best resolution for you for vertical games running on a horizontal monitor. Once you've made your selections, and providing you have that XML file in your folder, you'll go ahead and click on the Ultimark button here on the bottom right. If you don't have an XML file, you'll want to put a check mark up here on create new MAME.xml. And that'll create that file for you. You'll come back in here a second time and click on the Ultimark button again once you've made your selections. Well, that's it for part 2. In part 3, I'm going to take a look at some of the actual MAME games and check out the performance of some newer PC games running on the ArcadeVGA2.